I'm Dean Newland, and welcome to the Business of Intuition, where I coach, facilitate, train, and speak on the hard science and meaningful experience of intuitive leadership in business, so you can make better decisions, forge real connections, and creatively solve problems to amplify your impact and simplify your life. Welcome to the Business of Intuition.
Many of us know the frustration and the inefficiency of the annual review. We spend about several days, sometimes weeks, writing up a bunch of data and reports to be able to assess our team members in a variety of different areas. And it seems like we do nothing else during that time. The process is not only frustrating, but people are stressed out about receiving that information. And it's one of those things that managers often scoff at and employees often are afraid of. And so it's a pretty broken down system in many organizations. And my next guest on the Business of Intuition has found a way to be able to improve the performance management process by, in a sense, creating a new category, much like Uber created a new category away from taxi driving. And he, in our conversation, describes, one, some of the frustrations that we've already discussed a little bit, two, some of the ways in which his company has been able to add some technology to be able to improve the process, and three, some tips and tools that any of us can do right now to be able to make performance management a lot more effective and a lot more friendly. Projjal is the gentleman that I've talked to this morning. He was just getting up in Singapore while I was just finishing up my day in the western coast of the United States. So again, Projjal Ghatak is his name. Delightful individual. He is the founder of a company called OnLoop, which he started in 2020 to create a category called Collaborative Team Development, or CTD, to fundamentally reinvent how hybrid teams are assessed and developed. This was after over a decade of frustration with clunky, traditional enterprise performance management and learning processes and tools that were either hated or ignored by his teams at companies like Uber and Accenture, where he spent many years. He is now dedicated to a lifelong mission of unleashing the full potential of the world's 1 billion knowledge workers. Prior to founding OnLoop, Projjal spent 3.5 years at Uber in a variety of roles, including leading strategy and operations for business development globally, leading strategy and planning, and he was also the GM of the Philippines ride business. Besides Uber, he also spent some time raising debt and equity from New York hedge funds for industrial conglomerates in strategy consulting in Southeast Asia and in early stage companies in Latin America. Somewhere along the way, he also spent a couple of years at Stanford getting an MBA. Projjal Ghatak on the Business of Intuition. So Projjal, it's great to have you on the show, and I know that it's 8 a.m. in Singapore, where it's 4 or 5 o'clock West Coast time, so good morning as we are about ready to wind down, but thanks for your time on this. I would like to start this conversation about performance management, because I do think that there is a lot to be said for the statement that there's a lot that could be improved. We're engaged right now with a company, and they need some help, and it's just a mess, Calibration conversations nobody knows how to do. It's clunky. It's like driving an old jalopy. So I'd like for you to take us back in time, maybe when you were working at Uber, and what did you notice about that performance management system? Not to throw them under the bus, but just to simply say, what did you learn that made you go, geez, we should do something different? Because it sounds like your pain and frustration about performance management is what got you to the point to create OnLoop, the company that you now found. So tell us about that story.
Thanks, Dean. Thank you for having me. So, the story that is most stark in my mind goes back to January of 2018, when I was told to go run Uber's Philippines business. And so I inherited a 40-person team. And in about 2 weeks' time, we had to do calibrations for that organization. And in those 2 weeks...
Just to be clear, when you say calibrations, just so that everybody who's hearing this, I know what you mean, but you mean calibrations around performance management and how you're going to... Okay.
That's correct. So calibrations are these meetings that people have once a year, twice a year, to help decide people's ratings, people's bonuses, people's promotions, etc. And in those 2 weeks, literally everybody stopped working and spent the entire time writing out these performance reviews, which were long essays. And in my case, I had to write them for my own team and my cross-functional teams on the regional team. And so I usually had about 30 to 40 to write every cycle, which not only creates so much anxiety, apart from the time wasted, and then you're essentially making up stuff. And then when you walk into the calibration room, none of that data is actually used because they're not in a skimmable form to be actually utilized for decision making. So they become part of record keeping, and then they're played back to people and read out. But then when you walk into a calibration room, you make decisions based on what you remember and effectively who's the loudest voice in the room. So effectively, people's ratings are dictated by whose manager is good or whose manager is loud in those rooms. There's actually very little correlation to actual performance or actual work delivered. But if you had not even a great manager, just a loud manager, you would get the outcomes that you wanted.
Absolutely. And especially, if I may jump in, I noticed this too, that that process is difficult because you may not always be calibrating people against a set standard. You might just it might be more of a popularity contest than it is anything having to do with matching performance to, an expectation that everybody has. So continue on.
Yeah. And every manager has a different level of grade inflation with regards to how they rate people. And so when I rate you or someone else rates you, they will give you very different ratings despite being the same person. And so the ratings become much more about the rater versus the ratee. And, I continued to work at Uber for another year and a half before I left, started going on the startup. But that remained quite etched, and that came back in various shapes and forms in a lot of future calibration sessions. And what I tried to do personally when I moved into a global role at the BD organization is try and know everybody in the 120-person org personally myself, so that I could walk into that room and be the only person who had a little bit of an unbiased perspective on everyone. And because I knew that at least my ratings or my way of assessing the whole population was going to be consistent, whereas different leaders would argue for people in different ways. And technology has done a lot of work and a lot of benefit to fix a lot of processes. And so I realized there's probably something here to do as well.
All right. So you sort of define the problem well, very, very wasteful, highly stressful, not very efficient, doesn't necessarily rate the individual whom we are rating. It's more about the person who is making the judgment. I mean, there's a lot, I think, that you've really covered very well there. So my friend, here is your pitch, right? It's not that this is a pitch for your company, but I do want to know, what's the solution that you have created and how's it going?
Yeah. And, companies are born sometimes from ideas, and in our case, companies were born from the problem. And so, and it's, we fixate on the problem, less on the idea, and the idea evolves. And what we realized quite quickly into starting to work on solving this problem is that we had to reinvent the category because there's so much hate and disdain about the term performance management.
When you say reinvent it, like redefine it?
Both come up with something brand new, right? So if you think about, and I use the Uber example quite regularly, Uber had to invent ride hailing to fix taxis. It couldn't iterate on taxis and build next generation taxi. It had to build something net new. And we realized that we had to do the same and build an end-to-end approach that was fundamentally different. And we call that collaborative team development, or CTD, as
collaborative. Restate that again. Collaborative
team development.
Team development.
Okay.
Or development. Sorry.
Correct. Yes.
Accent on a different syllable. All right. That's correct. So collaborative team development. Understood. Yeah. Yep.
Right.
Okay.
So and CTD becomes a new approach to assess and develop hybrid teams through a much more forward-looking process than a backward process, which is performance management.
So more of looking into the future versus the rearview mirror.
That's correct.
Yes.
And how that gets done is building a much more regular habit of tracking at a fundamental level how people are feeling or doing. In fact, people's well-being has much more of an impact on performance than anything else. And so if you don't know sort of what someone's basal level of well-being is, working on anything on top of that is fundamentally useless. So that's the first layer. The second layer is, does this person have clarity on what they're working towards? With some organizations called goals or OKRs, what we've seen with OKRs is that they do a fairly good job at setting goals at a company level. They do a pretty crappy job at setting goals at a per person level. So, on product, there's a goals framework around targets, projects, behavioral skills, and hard skills. Because those are the four things that every individual is fundamentally working on through the course of a quarter or the course of a semester or the course of a year. And that is also a dynamic process of setting goals in the product. So you might know certain things at the beginning of the year, but some things might change 4 weeks down the line or 6 weeks down the line, so that you go on.
So let's take a pause. You just said a lot there. So you're more forward focused versus on the back end. You're thinking more about goals for the organization, but also how that individual links to that goal. What my goals are, and also about behaviors. So you're measuring that as well. And I think you also mentioned well-being. Was that true? Okay. So that's, go ahead, please.
So we call it the 5 layers of collaborative team development. So, and at the base layer is sort of a well-being check. The second layer is clarity of goals. The third and fourth layers are 2 feedback layers. So a celebrates layer to understand what someone does really well or what their superpowers are. And then an improve layer to identify each person's blind spots. And then a 5th layer of learning, whereby we unlock content for the individual based on what we see going on with their goals, with their strengths, with their weaknesses, so they're actually getting better over time. And then those 5 layers then run on a continual loop week on week.
Hence the name of the company, OnLoop.
That's correct.
It keeps going back. So with the 5th layer again was more about
getting better. So
are they getting better or not? Or
more around what can we do to make them better, right? So right now we unlock bite-sized content based on understanding your strengths or weaknesses or your goals, so that you sort of consuming things that make you better. There's a lot more we can do around that 5th layer with regards to coaching or actually tracking how much content we consume. But that's our overall platform, and that's a platform we keep building for a long time, and eventually connect with other tools or other products. But we believe that in this hybrid world, we have to fundamentally shift how we think about performance, and then how do we measure performance on an ongoing basis.
Understood. Okay. So then I know that you're trying to create a different category, much like Uber did with taxis and so forth. And are you also able to use your platform for an organization to be able to set bonuses or know about whether or not a person is promotable? Does this link to succession planning, for example? Which might be somewhat in the rears looking, like, well, what have you done for us, versus we know that you could do something, which is a potentiality, versus what have you actually created? Will it actually capture those successes that are in the past that add to an organization's ability to assess a person's performance?
Yeah. So, what I saw as the problem is there were very important decisions being made at a company about people with crappy data and with not a holistic sense of the people, right? So what our product does is now it collects significantly more disparate data points to get a full understanding of that person. Now, once you have the full understanding of that person, you then can make better decisions around, is that person promotable? Is that person a high performer? Is that person ready to take on more challenges, etc.? So, and exactly how each company does it also varies, right? So that we're not prescriptive around how to decide bonuses for an individual. What we are prescriptive about is how much data we should be collecting over the course of a quarter or a semester, and then how we should be looking at that data in terms of looking at someone's achievements across targets, projects, and skills, because sometimes companies are good at looking at only metrics versus the work holistically. And then looking at each person's superpowers or blind spots based on what behaviors are coming up most often versus someone scoring someone an 8 or a 7 or a 6 on strategic thinking, because that doesn't mean it. But if someone gets complimented for strategic thinking 7 times by 6 peers over the course of 3 months, the person's probably good at it. And that's a far better indicator of what someone's good at versus getting rated.
Understood. Okay. All right. Got it. So do you have any data yet that indicates that by using this particular version, if you will, performance management, your product, this OnLoop process, this collaborative team development process, are you seeing something from a company perspective or a team perspective that says, geez, this is working, we're getting results? What have you noticed so far?
Funny you asked that, because I just woke up to a WhatsApp message from the CEO of one of our customers in Dubai. It's an 80-person creative agency called Socialize, and their head of strategy was interviewed in an article where she spoke about introducing OnLoop as a company and what it's done to just fundamentally change the conversations people are having around sort of both performance and development, and being able to bring up tangible data points, but in a way that's non-threatening, because you're talking about behaviors versus, criticizing people about when you did that situation, I was frustrated. And a lot of that goes into how we've designed the product as well. And we've tried to make it playful and bite-sized and approachable. Because also what old practices like performance management has done is it's really made people hate goals, hate feedback, hate filling up these things that are actually are very important to them and are the basis of growth over time. So, as we work with organizations over several months, it becomes quite clear. And the really cool thing is we see people use the product more over time versus less over time, because as the data sort of compounds, you go and check the product for insights, not just to capture. And so it sort of gives you back additional value and increase in value as you.
So where do you see this going? I mean, do you have other things that you want to develop that would be ancillary to this, or are you going to just continue to scale what you have?
Yes. So the way I look at it is that there's about $380 billion that is spent globally on developing talent. We believe, and I think a lot of people believe, that spend is allocated extremely poorly and is often wasted by organizations. And so for us, if we're able to sort of bring much more clarity on each individual, I think our ability to also over time allocate that money in driving outcomes for teams will be significantly better. And so we over time want to really help companies do a better job in sort of delivering ROI on the investments that they make on their talent. I think additionally, and this is a rough estimate, I don't know what the exact number is, it's about $7 trillion of knowledge worker wages, which you can think about as an asset class. And that asset class is also very distributed by luck and where people show up and how that works. And so if you think about people as assets, and you think about sort of investments into their development, that money is not managed in the same way a hedge fund would manage investments in stocks or bonds. And we can do a lot more to make sure the right capital is being used in the right place. But that starts off with fundamentally having good data. And in my experience, the data that each individual has in themselves and organizations have on people is extremely shallow and extremely generic. And there's very little you can do with it. And so, which is why we focused on the input layer versus the analytics layer, because you can only analyze good data, and right now there's just not good data on people.
Yeah, and you said, I think before we started the conversation, that you've now begun to use AI as a summary tool, ChatGPT and so forth, to be able to even increase the optimization of the process.
That's correct. So, people don't want to do double work, right? So if you're sort of helping people do the ongoing work, we need to find a way to make sure that that work actually gets utilized when it comes to periodic reviews. And we got access to a private beta at OpenAI's GPT-3 in Q2 of 21. And we were already blown away at the time in terms of what that tech would do. And within 3 months, we were able to get to a place where we could feed GPT with these disparate captures and then sort of spit out a cohesive summary at the other end. And it's not perfect, right? And it never will be perfect, but it's a massive leap forward from sitting and writing these from scratch. And, that product's obviously evolved over time. ChatGPT is a massive improvement over GPT-3. We haven't integrated ChatGPT into the product yet, but we will over the next few months. And what that will also allow us to even use the power of generative AI even earlier on in the development process. So for example, people really struggle on how to write good feedback.
Yes.
And that's all the things people really struggle with. Now, you can feed ChatGPT just your raw thoughts and it will rewrite it for you.
Yes.
And in the future, it will also let you record in your own voice. So you could create a voice note that's completely generated that sounds like you. Yeah, it removes all the frustration in your voice and focuses on the content of the feedback. And think about what that can do to accelerate how much feedback happens in organizations. And so,
for sure.
And so we are incredibly excited about the possibilities of the tech in really growing manager and team effectiveness.
So, Projjal, aside from, we got to cover two things so far. The problem with current performance management, the pain that you just described, your process, which sounds fascinating, and I've got a little bit more information on that. Aside from that, somebody listening to this, do you have any particular tips or tools before they might get to using your work? I mean, is there something looking to say, if you guys just do these two things, this will make your current process better? What recommendations, best practices might you share?
So we actually have a one-on-one template on our website, onloop.com, which I see getting downloaded quite often. And really, managers just need to be having the right conversations at the right frequency with their team.
What is the right frequency? Because I think that's a hot topic for some.
Yeah. I think consensus is once a week with every direct report. And so each manager should not be having more than 6 to 8 direct reports. And you should be having a conversation once a week with your direct report. And then once a month, that one-on-one conversation should be only developmental, whereby you try and not talk at all about the day-to-day, and you try and think through overall progress, both in terms of projects and goals, but as well as sort of feedback. And then, every quarter you try and do something more formal where, in our product, you can print out a wisdom summary, but if whatever process you have, you do some level of collation of what's going on and do broader strokes of what you might really want to change. It's the same way our business is run, right? So your weekly business review is short and quick. Your monthly is a little bit longer. Your quarter is more detailed, and your semi-annual, annual is more. So it's the same principles applied to human development too.
So the point about the human development process that you just talked about, I could see that a company, and I don't know your company well enough to know this, but that by using technology to provide feedback, I'm not saying that that's wrong, but there is a different quality of a relationship that takes place. So when you and I, Projjal, we sit down and we actually have a live conversation. Maybe it has to be over Zoom or whatever. Yeah. And that I think that, what I've noticed, we've done a lot of 360s. And and we always encourage the person who got the 360 to say, go and share this with your leader, go and share this with your team. And those that have been most successful with the process have actually been able to say, I want more feedback. Let's not wait for the next 360. And they actually encourage it, and they start a new trend in their department about more honest, transparent, real life feedback. What I've noticed, even before technology is sort of coming into play, is that, we sort of hide behind the next 360 or the next annual review. And I'm not going to say anything to you because I'm too afraid, because our conflict is such that it doesn't warrant that, and we don't have enough trust to do that. So these feedback sessions become, we want to hide from them. We don't want to give them live feedback. So my question is, how do we balance the efficiency of technology giving us feedback with the value of giving each other feedback in a more personal, real-time way?
That's a great question. And in fact, depending on the type of feedback, our product deals with it differently. So if it's a piece of Celebrate feedback, we really encourage people to share it right away. If it's improved feedback, we encourage people to jot it down so that you reflect on the specific situation, but only share it in person first. And then once it's shared in person, the product can be used to help collate it. So we in no way propose that people replace the in-person conversation. Rather what we really want is that those in-person conversations to happen with the right information. And so they should be happening with a full set of data points versus what a manager just remembers on a particular spiky moment that's stuck in their mind versus the 10 specific situations in the last couple of weeks that could have been relevant, and look at things a lot more holistically.
And I'm going to challenge you a little bit on this because I wonder about this, because the encouragement to say, let's go and do some real-time face-to-face feedback.
Yeah.
Given the option not to, because I now have a technology that can do it for me. Yeah. I would think that could probably eliminate some people from their actual face-to-face just because they have a crutch. Like what? Well, I know I should, but I think I'm doing what I should be doing because I'm just putting it into this tool.
Yeah. So what we've seen happen with teams actually is that there's a huge anxiety hurdle about delivering feedback face-to-face. And what writing it down in the app first does is that it increases level of prep and therefore also reduces that anxiety. So it's actually easier for that person to now go deliver it because it's given them a prep session to how to think about it and the behavior tags to think about, okay, what did this person actually do that could be done better next time? And so we don't have exact stats around this, but we've heard from customers that's actually helped them do the face-to-face conversation and given them confidence that they can deliver it the right way versus having to think about it from scratch.
Now, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's maybe the second tip that I'm going to actually call out of this conversation for those who are not necessarily jumping on the website and getting your product is, more feedback once a week, 6 people, depending upon industry, is probably about a good ratio.
Yeah.
Once a month, more development, to your point, once a quarter, probably a little more formal, a little more feedback than probably less as good. And then number 2 is the preparation. If you're going to give feedback, certainly don't do it when you're all pissed off, right?
Correct.
Like maybe if you need to write it down, we'll get your thoughts into a piece of paper and clarify what it is you're trying to say before actually saying it.
Yeah, and then just 2 more sort of just quarter turns there. Some will use the term feed forward, right? Versus feedback, which is, what behaviors would you change? And then the second tip that I've actually heard from a psychologist named Esther Perel, who does a lot of work with relationships, is sort of pointing things out as a wish versus a criticism, right? Mm-hmm. So, and that helps the other person feel much more engaged in the conversation versus put the person on the defensive, because now I'm sort of communicating this as my wish to you versus you are bad at X, Y, and Z. And people will just respond very differently just based on what the framing is.
I know, and it seems like, and I'm going big picture, this is not obviously anything to do specifically with you, but the pandemic has, I think, in my personal opinion, got us so sequestered and got us so afraid to come out of our houses for some people. Yeah. And then you add on top of it the fear of conversation, real-time conversation. I remember when we first started getting back after the pandemic lockdown and we would get into these live meetings. One, people were really ecstatic to see each other, and the other hand, they were stumbling. They didn't really know how to get engaged in conversation, let alone have a tough conversation, right? So I think that as a society, we're getting so, so inefficient, so ineffective at having conversation, certainly conversation. Everything is personal, right?
Yeah.
And we're interpreting everything from a lens about what's wrong with me and what's wrong with you. And the division and all the political stuff that we've seen globally is also a sort of an outcropping of that. And it all comes down to, it's like, I was talking to somebody, I don't know, some kid who was young, and what's your solution to this situation? He goes, I think we should just sit down and talk to each other. Yeah. I remember when I was a little boy, I'm much older than you, right? And I remember, like, I don't know, we were still at the very end of the Vietnam War in, the United States. But I think the Vietnam War finished in 1974. And I was just a little kid. I thought, well, I'm going to write to my president. So I write to my president. I said, I think we should all just sit down and talk about it, of course, I got some stock letter back from some sort of lackey who said, thank you very much, Steve, for sending the letter. They'll take it under advisement. But the point was the simplicity of that.
Yes.
Talking to people in real time and having the courage to do so. I think we've gotten so much more fearful. And so I love what you're doing. And I would encourage everybody to continue to have those conversations and not to hide behind technology because we just are feeling afraid.
No, absolutely. And we just saw technology as an aid to build an approach that leads to better conversation, right? And there is never replacement. Even when we are sitting in VR, I think we will use it to work so that this will be a replacement of Zoom, and it will make these conversations more real life. But we're not going to go hang out with our friends on a MetaQuest Pro. And so that will still sort of go back to real life. And I think, as the machines get better, we should cling on to real life because that's all we have to differentiate. So the more we make the real world better, the more we can differentiate against the machine.
Oh yeah, and we got to hang out to whatever is naturally human, and I think there is something to be said for, having a conversation with somebody and sharing your impressions of somebody else and having that tough conversation. I was talking to a gal on the podcast last week, and she just made such a great point that I forgot. But she said it's all about the conversation. Yeah, the goal is almost secondary. It's like if that didn't work, because I say something to you, I'm giving you feedback, and you can't accept it. Well, I did what I could do. I'm done. My job is done. Her point was saying, no, your job is not done. You need to now say it in another way. So then say it another way again, so that you can at least get it to a point where now you can hear it. My responsibility is to do that. But wow, that's pretty good, right? And one of us have a hard enough time to say it the first time, let alone trying to recalibrate it 4 or 5 times because the receiver is having a hard time getting it. But anyway, I do think the conversation, the connection that creates between two people is the quintessential part of what it is to be human. And if your process can help us get there, oh gosh, fantastic. So it's great to chat with you, my friend. And I wanted just to ask, how do people connect to you? Tell us a little bit about your website. Just give us a quick little promo on how one could learn more.
Yeah, no, it's onloop.com. So that's the best resource to learn more about our product. And I'm Projjal Ghatak on LinkedIn. If you just search for a company on LinkedIn or Twitter, you'll find me. So please feel free to connect.
Yeah, so it's Projjal Ghatak. Yeah. Okay, good. Well, it's really nice to meet you. Have a good beginning of your day as I finish mine. I've never been to Singapore other than just landing in your airport. I would love to go and hang out there sometime. It looks like a wonderful, beautiful city. You've got great history. I love the story about how that whole thing came about, but that's a whole other time in another podcast.
It's an amazing country. It's hard to leave. So it keeps me here.
Fantastic. Well, have a good one.
You too, Dan. Bye.
Okay.
Thank you for listening to The Business of Intuition. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to learn more about Dean or Mission Facilitators Leadership, go to mfileadership.com. That's mfileadership.com.